Good afternoon and welcome. It is so good to see all of you. We're going to be starting in about another minute or so. We're so pleased that you could take some time out of your day to join us to hear an exciting, innovative presentation by Capstone students from the Bush School. We will begin momentarily. Thank you for joining us. Also, just to let you know, this session, as with all of our webinars, is being recorded so that you can share it with colleagues and friends after today's event. If for some reason you would not like to be recorded, we ask that you remove yourself now. Thank you for joining us. The link to past webinars has been placed in the chat. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Angela Logan, and I am an associate teaching professor in the Department of Management and Organization and the St. Andre Bessette Academic Director of the Master of Nonprofit Administration at the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame du Lac. And that concludes the webinar. Just kidding. And we would like, but for the purposes of today, I come to you as the president-elect and as the chair of the Curricular Guidelines Committee. And we would like to thank you for joining us for today's Nonprofit Academic Centers Council webinar, professional development webinar, discussing the curricular guidelines revision, research and findings from the Bush School Capstone team at Texas A&M. On behalf of the board of directors, as well as executive director Nicole Collier, we'd like to thank you for joining. Just a little bit about NACC. NACC is an international membership association comprised of academic centers or programs at accredited colleges and universities that focus on the study of nonprofit governmental organizations, voluntary action, and/or philanthropy. To learn, NACC serves the nonprofit and philanthropic academic community through its work, which includes biennial conferences and research summits, curricular guidelines, which we'll be discussing together, accreditation of standalone programs, publication opportunities, annual member meetings, and opportunities today, such as today's professional development webinars. To learn more about NACC or to consider joining, please use the QR code on your screen to find out more. And with that, I will turn over the presentation to the team from the Bush School at Texas A&M. Their advisor has been Dr. Deborah Kerr. It has been an honor and a true joy to work with them this past academic year. So team, take it away.
So before we get started, we wanted to let you know we're going to have a lot of time for questions at the end. We've worked a lot on this report, so we're eager to engage with you on any questions you might have. And going through this process, we've really been able to see the value and importance of the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. And although we do not speak with students as part of our research design, we believe that because we are students and have owned this process, that we are still giving NACC a valuable student perspective. NACC has two flagship products, the curricular guidelines and the indicators of quality. And the organization has asked us to conduct an external review of these products. Overall, we find that they're pretty good products and that students who learn using them are going to be well prepared for the sector. We do have some recommendations for change, and this presentation will discuss the process we took to get to those recommendations and then explain them in depth.
A little bit about our capstone structure. We are graduate school students in our second year. We're about to graduate, and we are at the Texas A&M Bush School of Public Service. And many of the people on our team are actually studying nonprofit management, and some of us are also studying public policy and public management. We began meeting back in the fall twice a week. We've been meeting with Dr. Logan every week since August. And as you can see, we've put a lot of hours and research into the recommendations that we're making to NACC. Each of us have kind of taken on different parts of the research process, but we have had several systems in place to ensure that the findings that we produce are reliable. And these are our project deliverables. We are giving NACC a final report which details our process, our methodology, our limitations, and the recommendations. And we are also providing NACC with an updated indicators of quality framework that operationalizes the existing indicators of quality and provides a tool for measurement for member programs. This is a high-level overview of our research process. We started with some research questions in the fall, and we pared those down a bit once we got into our research and found the things that the research was more responsive to. Our main sources of input for data were literature reviews and focus groups with expert academics and practitioners. And these produced our final report in our indicators of quality framework. The main thing to consider is the systems that we had in place to produce this work. As I said, we have 10 team members, and if you don't have good systems and methodologies in place, you can't expect a good and reliable product. And so we ensured that we had methodologies for our literature reviews, for our coding, for selecting experts for our focus groups, for the research for our indicators of quality, so that we were all on the same page throughout the entire process, and so that we could produce findings that were as unbiased as possible.
We conducted literature reviews on all the topics found in the curricular guidelines, on the indicators of quality, and on a few other topics like member associations and diversity, equity, and inclusion. We sought to identify patterns, trends, and gaps in the literature, and also identify recommendations. And here you can see just a small sample of how we organized a lot of our literature. We did a lot of the literature review research in the fall, and it was great background into all the topics discussed in the curricular guidelines, because it is a lot of information. And so we wanted to have a good understanding of those topics, especially going into the focus groups.
And we started planning for our focus groups back in the fall. And the reason that we chose to do focus groups is because we really felt like we needed to hear the perspective of expert academics and expert practitioners to be able to compare that to what the literature was saying, to see how we needed to update the curricular guidelines and indicators of quality. And so we had selection criteria for choosing these experts. For academics, it was an H score of 10. However, we did also look at some holistic experience. So if the H score was lower and someone was in the process of publishing and had maybe a significant international experience with nonprofits, and we might have also included them. For practitioners, we looked at their management experience primarily, as well as their international experience, because we really were trying to get as much of an international view as possible. We had 9 different participants that were either located internationally or had that significant international experience. And to put people into focus groups, we really tried to pair them based on their area of expertise. So for example, if someone was more of an expert and did more research in the area of nonprofit marketing, then we tried to put them in a focus group that was specifically targeting that topic.
The purpose of our data analysis methodology was to narrow down all of our data into useful recommendations for NACC. And so a recommendation has 3 elements, the first being criteria. Criteria is the evidence that justifies a change to the curricular guidelines. And that evidence comes from both the literature reviews and the focus groups. And criteria also asks what the curricular guidelines say about that topic already, because we don't want to duplicate information. Next is context. And context asks, why might that topic not be part of the curricular guidelines already? And then effect, which is the intended benefit of making that change. How do students or programs or organizations benefit if the curricular guidelines were to reflect the recommendation we make? And we intentionally wanted this to be a rigorous process for making a recommendation, set a high bar to clear. But if there were ideas we had that we liked but didn't meet all of these requirements, then we offer them to NACC as options. Options are good strategies. They're good ideas that we feel strongly about, but they might, for example, have evidence only from the focus groups and not the literature reviews. So before we go into our recommendations, we wanted to give an opportunity for you to ask clarifying questions about our methodology. Okay, well, if you have other questions later on, we'll have time later as well. So our recommendations and options, our recommendations are combined into 3 themes. The first is recommendations about the substance of the curricular guidelines. Second is recommendations about the structure of the curricular guidelines. And then third are recommendations for NACC as an organization. The options also reflect these 3 themes, but they're presented just as one group. And a little bit of terminology, when we talk about domains, we're talking about the top line. For example, 10.0 fundraising and resource development, that's a domain. And when we talk about a guideline, we're talking about 10.3, for example. And so our recommendations are going to use this language. So our first recommendation, again, about the substance of the curricular guidelines, to incorporate service learning in graduate level coursework and emphasize it as an effective pedagogical approach in the introduction of the curricular guidelines. We know that students learn very well from applying their classroom lessons to the real world. And that was emphasized in both the literature and the focus groups. And right now, the curricular guidelines include service learning for undergraduate students. We think graduate students would benefit as well. Second recommendation, to add critical perspectives of nonprofit and philanthropic organizations in a social, historical, and economic context to graduate domain 2. The sector exists in a dynamic world, and it has sometimes created or perpetuated the harms that we now seek to address. And we can talk about issues of democracy and representation, economic issues, justice broadly. We don't specify specific critical perspectives that should be included in a curriculum, but we think learning about them and having the opportunity to pick different ones gives students the tools and the perspectives to go into the sector, make positive changes, and move forward ethically. And we also think that professors and programs can choose those perspectives that are most relevant or useful for their students and their communities. Third, to add the practice of collaboration and partnerships within and across sectors to graduate domain 6. Collaboration is important, not only organization to organization, but also across sectors. And when we're talking about advocacy and social change, these are big issues that affect a lot of different sectors. And we think students benefit from learning about this in learning about collaboration and emphasizing collaboration across sectors within advocacy and social change.
So recommendation 4 is to include operational strategy development as an additional guideline in graduate domain 12. This domain really centers on leadership, management, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And we know that managers deal with a lot of complexity within nonprofit organizations, and they're responsible for really directing their organization, for planning, for building out their organization and the growth. And the existing guidelines for domain 12 really address the theory and the role of managers. But they don't necessarily explicitly mention strategy development. And this was something that came up both in the literature and in the focus groups, is the need for students to understand how to build operational strategies to make their organizations more sustainable. And so especially in times of crisis, in times of challenging things happening, if students understand how to build these strategies and to implement them, then they can set their organization up for a more sustainable future. Recommendation 5 is to include planning and implementation of strategic human resource management and strategic volunteering framework in nonprofit organizations as an additional guideline to graduate domain 13. We know that employees and volunteers are the most valuable asset that our organizations have. And for students to have a framework for recruiting good people, for maintaining good people, and also for recruiting and maintaining volunteers and for using them effectively is going to, again, make their organizations more sustainable. We know that retention can be a challenge in the nonprofit sector because you're doing challenging work, and to teach students how to really maintain their talent and their volunteers as a major resource can set organizations up for greater success. And this is a recommendation related to the structure of the curricular guidelines. So recommendation 6 is to move all guidelines related to leadership to graduate domain 5, which is about governance and leadership. And this would leave a separate new domain titled organizational management as domain 12. And this domain would contain all of the guidelines specific to nonprofit management. The reason that we're recommending this is because we found in the literature, and the focus groups confirm this, that leadership and management are two separate disciplines with two different skill sets. And we understand that there may be overlap in those skill sets, but it's necessary for students to learn both skill sets independently. And leadership goes more with governance and leadership as we think about board leadership, and as we also think about executive leadership. And then that management domain can turn more into an organizational management domain that has to do with more strategies and more with the role of managers as they are separate.
Next, we have recommendations for NACC as an organization. First, to take a leadership role in the development of nonprofit performance measurement systems that address the sector's need for a comprehensive performance evaluation system. The literature and the focus groups emphasize the importance of performance measurement and program evaluation, and yet our students are not graduating with these skills. We think this is an opportunity for NACC to lead in not only developing the systems that organizations can use to evaluate themselves and measure their work, but also to bring people together, academics and practitioners, create a community of practice and really spread this knowledge and make it useful for the sector. Recommendation 8 is to expand the roles and responsibilities of NACC and enhance the benefits offered to NACC members. We know that NACC offers opportunities for networking and collaboration and learning. For example, this webinar, here we are. We want NACC to continue pushing in this way. We want them to be a leader in the sector. And we also want them to consider adding exclusive membership benefits that raise the value of NACC membership and of associating with NACC. Associating with NACC, yes. Next are our options. First, to move social entrepreneurship and social enterprising themes from graduate domain 12 to graduate domain 8 to provide students a better context for understanding these market approaches. Right now, social entrepreneurship is included with domain 12, and we think that's because entrepreneurship and enterprising is often associated with leadership, which makes sense. But because these are market approaches that particularly use for-profit mechanisms, we think students benefit from learning about them in the context of nonprofit economics. Option 2, to combine graduate domain 2 with graduate domain 3, and to move guideline 2.6 to graduate domain 1. We find some overlap in graduate domain 2 and graduate domain 3, and we think the guidelines benefit from being tightened up and reducing some of these redundancies. And we also think guideline 2.6, which begins with the words comparative global trends, goes well with domain 1, which is about comparative global perspectives.
Option 3 is to emphasize the importance of using a systems thinking approach in the introduction section of the curricular guidelines. systems thinking approach is something that can be really applied to all of the domains and all of the guidelines, which is why we emphasize it as something that can be used more as a pedagogical approach. This is an approach that allows problems to be looked at from an interconnectedness standpoint. And so it looks at the root causes of the issue and how it relates to many other things. As some focus group members mentioned, it's kind of like the ecosystem of looking at an issue. And option 4 is to encourage member institutions to offer special topic courses that focus on the study of the nonprofit sector in non-Western countries. And this is really responsive to our research on international nonprofits, understanding that there's not a lot of research that's being produced by nonprofit programs, not as much that's being produced by nonprofit programs internationally, and that we just don't have quite as many nonprofits outside of Western countries. However, we want to prepare students to work in a globalized system, globalized society, and offering courses on topics such as civil service in Eurasia could really help students get a perspective of the global nonprofit environment. We understand that not all programs might have the capacity to offer something like this, but for example, the Bush School has an international affairs school. And so like we could pull on faculty and staff from that side of our school to work on courses like this. And next, we are going to move into our indicators of quality framework. This is something that we are really excited about. It is a separate deliverable and a bit of a separate process as well from what we just talked about. So the indicators of quality framework operationalizes the indicators of quality. And when I say that, I mean that it makes it more measurable. And so we added metrics that will allow member programs to rate themselves and to self-assess where they're at on different indicators. And what we're recommending to NACC is that they would give member programs specifically an online portal and exclusive access to this. And what can happen with this is that the member program could upload their results and the way in which they're currently measured, their current average scores to this online portal. And NACC could provide individualized feedback to these member programs with recommendations for how they could improve. And the great thing about this tool is that it's editable. And so you can decide when you want to be assessed. You can decide if that's once a year, if that's quarterly, if that's every couple of years, and assess how you're moving forward on that scale. And so this is what the indicators of high quality education currently looks like. And this is the only section of the indicators of quality that we worked on. And there are other sections that we did not approach. However, we are including a rigorous methodology for NACC. And so if they wanted to replicate this work for the other parts, like part A and B, then they totally could. And then this is what the indicators now looks like with what we're recommending. And so you can see that it's just more measurable. We have criteria that has percentages that are backed and rooted in the research. And then that score and average on the right side of this screen is going to change. So as programs self-assess themselves, and that average will hopefully change over time. And it's really unique because it is going to be up to each program to figure out where they want to be on this.
So
So as we wrap up, we wanted to thank you for listening and coming to the webinar. We also wanted to thank NACC for giving us this opportunity to work with them and to learn about the sector. It's been a privilege to work with NACC because they are working for the betterment of this sector that we all believe in. It supports us and we support it. So thank you for that opportunity, and we are ready for your questions. And I might leave the slides up for now in case someone has questions to go back to a slide.
Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, team. Are there any questions?
I don't know if you want them verbally or if you want them in chat. This is Ellen Wynarczyk from the University of Denver. Congratulations, everybody. Brilliant work. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing a very comprehensive examination of these. these wonderful standards. One question I had was around why service learning specifically? Why not project-based learning? Why not something civic engagement? So I was wondering if there was any particular thinking around that particular recommendation.
Yeah, I can go ahead and answer that. Hi, my name is Radine Francis. I was part of the Bush School Capstone team, and I did a lot of the literature review specifically on service learning. And service learning is an indicator of high quality education just across higher education in general. And so when looking specifically at nonprofit management and the literature that was in that space, service learning and the way that the information that students are getting in the classroom and applying it to community was really highlighted and really emphasized. And then when we moved into focus groups, it was also something that was brought up quite a bit, and kind of it was emphasized as well that students are getting a lot of the information on policy, on how to do the work, but not putting it into direct implementation, and being able to create networks between the program or the center that's having a nonprofit, that has a nonprofit management program, and connecting them with their community is really important so that students can learn how to better serve when they go out into the field. And so it's really giving students the hands-on knowledge to take their work from the classroom into the field before they graduate. So that was something that, because it was emphasized in both the literature and in the focus groups, it's something that we thought would be a great recommendation for NACC to put in the introduction of their curricular guidelines, so that educators can kind of choose the ways in which throughout their courses they want to incorporate service learning.
I would also add to that, that because of the importance of volunteerism and service in the sector, that service learning gives students an opportunity to engage with those themes, different than some of these other approaches might, for example, project-based learning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, you had a question?
Yes. So first of all, also congratulations. You've done amazing work and lots of really good things that I'm sure we'll be incorporating. So that's terrific. You've exceeded even my high expectations of what the result of this project would be. So that's fabulous. I guess I'm following Ellen and follow up on that service learning aspect and the way in which we frame it and the options. I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the original curricular guidelines. I assume that service learning wasn't incorporated into the graduate guidelines, because there might have been an assumption, and this is certainly true for our program. So, by the way, I'm John Casey from Baruch College, City University of New York, so in New York City. The reality in our program is that in the graduate program, 80% of our students are already working in the sector, and those 20% who aren't working in the sector are required to do an internship as part of credits towards their program. So one of my emphasis in the teaching, and I teach both domestic issues, but also I teach a course on international comparative issues. My emphasis always is that people kind of reflect on their workplace, bring in material from their workplace, analyze their workplaces. So that's, I guess, another form of service learning. Maybe Ellen uses the right word about project-based learning, but a lot of the learning can be project-based, based on their own current professional experience. So if we could find some way to incorporate more language about that, that might be a suggestion. Thank you. But as I said, excellent work.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that.
Hi, I have a question. This is Elise Kiefer. I'm at Murray State University. Again, congratulations. Really great work, guys. I was wondering if in your exploration of graduate programs, was there anything that you would find particularly transferable to undergraduate programs?
I'm not sure we could think of anything. That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and I will say that we did look into the differences between graduate and undergraduate guidelines, trying to kind of figure out if there was like a research-based approach that was widely used for creating undergraduate versus graduate. And there's really not. It seems like most institutions kind of intuitively decide on those undergraduate versus graduate guidelines. And the way that they're currently set up in the curricular guidelines, it doesn't seem like the research contradicts it. And so we did look at that piece, but as I said, I feel like we didn't necessarily find anything that was an alternative.
I also just want to circle back to the service learning aspect real quick and why it was emphasized so heavily for us in our recommendation at the graduate level. And that's because, for instance, at the Bush School, we don't currently have an undergraduate program that's specific to nonprofit management. And so anybody who is learning about nonprofit management at Texas A&M is going to be in the Bush School and doing some of this work for the first time. And so even for many institutions that may have that undergraduate program specific to nonprofit management already, then service learning would of course probably already be emphasized in that realm and taught. But for those who are coming in fresh and haven't looked at this material before and done the work in the sector, then service learning is really important for that work.
Other questions for our team? Oh, John?
I'm holding off if nobody else has got questions. This is a topic I can talk about forever. Curriculum guidelines in general. I'm interested in the international aspect. So your let's say recommendations came down in terms of looking at nonprofits in non-Western countries. So yes, really important. I would say, in fact, there's more and more literature on that. And if I can do some naked self-promotion for myself, but also for Will Brown. So, Will and Matt Hale have this new book coming out on preparing nonprofit leaders. And I humbly contributed the chapter on the international dimension and teaching the international dimensions of the nonprofit sector. I'd be interested. So yes, you came down on looking at non-Western. I'd be interested in what more kind of the discussion was about international nonprofits. I'd in fact kind of had expected and thought that maybe there'd be even more recommendations about what's currently lacking. I mean, the guidelines already do talk about kind of the comparative aspects of looking at the nonprofit sector. I was just interested in sort of what sort of discussions people had about the international dimensions, if people thought the guidelines were sufficient at the moment, except for that, as you quite well pointed out, the kind of specific focus on non-Western countries. I'd just be interested to hear what the discussion was about the international dimension.
That's a great question, and it's something that we definitely spent a lot of time looking into. I'm going to go over a piece of it that will probably answer your question, and then Carly's going to follow up. In the revised indicators of quality that we're offering, there are indicators that specifically talk about international nonprofit management elements. And so, for example, there's one, and it's on the curriculum, incorporates the dynamic nature of a diverse sector that spans the globe. And the indicators on that would be that you offer courses on international nonprofit management elements. So that is included in the indicators of quality that we are offering to NACC. And there are some other things that I'm not explicitly mentioned that do specifically relate to teaching students about international nonprofits. And then do you want to fill in?
Yeah, just kind of expand further on the discussion on international nonprofits and NACC's role in that. In the beginning, we were starting to develop a database that kind of provided NACC all the nonprofit programs internationally that NACC could form relationships with and have memberships. However, through our research, we found that it's important to have curricular guidelines that address the international nonprofits. However, with NACC being, instead NACC should be a resource for nonprofit programs across the world, instead of being a sole leader. That way you're not going to the other countries and saying, oh, you should follow these recommendations, instead to be more of a resource and a guidance for these nonprofit programs. So we address more the international concept in that way for nonprofits.
Thank you.
Ellen, you have a question, and then Elizabeth, I'll get your question from the chat.
Great, thanks, Angela. To the performance evaluation system that you proposed and came up with, I'm guessing that that is specifically to evaluate the performance of higher education programs. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it
But-
depends
And-
it depends what you're asking. Are you asking about the indicator of quality framework or our recommendation about performance measurement and program evaluation?
All I wrote down was performance evaluation system. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
That's about nonprofit organizations, probably.
Well,
But our
and I guess that's what I was wondering is, are you proposing NACC develop a product by which to help nonprofit organizations evaluate their performance, which would be very interesting and certainly potentially revenue producing, which is a great and an interesting idea.
Yeah, we are recommending that NACC come together and decide what kind of product they might be capable of making, and then that is useful to these organizations. So that is what we're talking about. There is a lot of work on program evaluation, of course, and performance measurement, and some of that work does deal with nonprofit organizations. We think NACC could bring these efforts together and lead in this way.
Great, thanks. That you did clarify you did answer my question.
Okay, well, thank you for the question.
So Elizabeth Castillo put in the chat, impressive work, research team. Did you consider a recommendation about individuals' personal development, such as metacognition, perspective taking, and self-regulation? And her internet's acting wonky. All of our internets are acting wonky. I personally love it when my internet tells me that it's unstable, because I look at it and say, same sis, same.
Yeah, this came up in our focus groups in terms of when we're talking about leadership, and it wasn't a major factor in our literature review. So I would say we had some thoughts about it, but we never seriously considered making a recommendation about this. We think it's useful and important based on what came out of the focus groups, because that piece, that personal development, whether it leads to leadership or not, but just personal development is important for our students and for professionals working in this sector.
I would also like to add on to that in one of the literature reviews that we conducted, we did not necessarily personal development, but the professional and career development of nonprofit practitioners as they're doing this work. And so it was something that didn't end up becoming a full recommendation. However, NACC will have access to our full literature review that we did on kind of how the nonprofit is involved in professional development. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of literature explicit to nonprofit practitioner professional development. And that's also something that, you know, in the future, hopefully the sector takes the time to look into that work a little bit. But there is literature that NACC could look into it to see if there's any ideas of how to build upon that a little bit more.
In a shameless self-promotion moment, give me a year or so and I will have that product on the market. Wes, you had a question?
Yeah, just real briefly, you use the word operational in front of strategy. I usually think of strategy as more global than operational. Is there a reason why you used operational?
We used operational because we're specifically talking about managers and strategies that are more internal to an organization. So strategies around the operations of an organization, whether that could be planning for crisis, whether that's just a long-term strategy plan. And so that's why we included that in there. Does that answer your question?
Well, I usually think of strategy formation as like doing a SWOT analysis where you're doing internal and external as well, trying to determine what strategy to take for your organization. And it usually isn't just operational. So I'm just wondering why you used operational, but I guess I can see you're trying to make it more the internal rather than more typical with strategy, which is external and internal.
Yes.
I would say that some of the curricular guidelines touch on kind of that SWOT analysis, the other forms of analysis that you're talking about. And so that wasn't emphasized as much in our recommendations that we made to NACC. The operational management side of things is where we saw a gap in what the curricular guidelines were offering in creating this curricular for nonprofit management programs. And so that's why we focused on that specific area, because we felt that the other areas were more covered.
Before I pull Ellen in, just as a note, circling back to what Elizabeth's previous question, she would urge you to consider adding that as an optional recommendation. It's vital to organizational effectiveness. So thinking about the individual personal development as a potential recommendation. Ellen?
I was just going to comment on the operational strategy idea. With the advent of all of the different data dashboards that organizations are developing to inform their operations, there is a strategicness to operations that has emerged because of all of the data that we now have and can capture and have operationalized to inform how nonprofits do their services, their work, et cetera. So it's kind of interesting that it hopped up in that recommendation, because operational strategy, I think, will become potentially more influential.
Thank you.
Just as an aside, looking back through the chat, Elise, I don't know if you caught the comment from Stuart Mandel about undergrad versus graduate education. And so he has his contact information in the chat for you to kind of check on. Also, team, you got a lot of kudos from the individuals who are on the call, including, and I wanted to highlight this one specifically from Nicole Esparza at USC, noting that you spoke for a lot of students across many programs. And I would echo that, because you added a perspective. So it wasn't necessary for you to have a focus group with students, because you were your own focus group, doing a little auto ethnographic research. So there you go. We do appreciate that. Other questions? Heather?
I know that I stated this on Tuesday, but it was a different group. So I really appreciate the fact that you included the indicators of quality around curriculum. And as NACC is accredited now, 14, 15 groups, schools, we are soon exploring accreditation further. And as NACC guidelines are a major piece of accreditation, it will be really exciting to explore how we can further look into the quality of our curriculum and our program learning outcomes. So thank you for giving us this as an option for discussion.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments, reflections? Well, if not, thank you again, team, for all your hard work. I know I speak for all those gathered in that we appreciate your expertise. And as I've been saying throughout my time with you this year, you all have been an excellent reminder of why we do what we do, because if these are, you all are a reflection of what's being produced by the Bush School, which also is a reflection of what we are producing at our respective institutions. So thank you for your time and effort. And I believe, and good luck, enjoy commencement weekend as it's coming up. Finish strong with your finals. And I believe I'm turning it over to Heather for some final wrap-up comments.
Thank you. I know a lot of people just left, so, but if you're still around, there is really some amazing past webinars that have been recorded on administering, assessing nonprofit academic programs. We just had a really amazing student-run webinar last week, and it was focused for students on using LinkedIn to accelerate your career. We're hoping to do some more student-focused webinars in the fall. So if you have any ideas for those students that are in our nonprofit programs, and we're also going to be having Will Brown and Matt Hale and the team from their amazing book. And I pulled it up and now it's, anyway, Will can pop in and say what the title is. That is going to be talking about nonprofit education, and the authors from that book are going to be sharing. We also are going to do one more webinar in the fall, and we're open to all webinar ideas focused on nonprofit education, academic programs, nonprofit centers, how to do your work more effectively. We're also trying to gather a group that are doing nonprofit statewide and regional studies through centers or programs. So if you do one of those, please reach out to me and we'll get you involved in speaking on that webinar and how we can collaborate further in our statewide and regional studies. So that's my spiel. Thank you for attending today.
Thank you again. At this time of the academic year, being able to even have a few minutes returned to you is a gift. So we've bought you 11 minutes. You're welcome. Thank you. Be safe, finish strong. And again, for more information about past webinars or about NACC, please feel free to follow the QR code. Stay safe, be well, take good care.